this one. This one. So, this is the synaptic cleft. Say, if the neurotransmitters are released here, then it will be received by specific receptor in the next neuron or in the next cell. And there will be again action potential propagation until it reaches to the central nervous system. The central nervous system interprets say tawag interpret niya say hot, no? So that's the time nga ipasa na po niya sa motor neuron to the target organ, then that's the time nga maka-feel na siya o init. But the sudden removal of the hand when you feel you touch the hot object, say init, the sudden remove before you know that you could feel the heat from from katong imuhang gihikap, say from the kettle maybe. You have already removed your hand. The sudden removal of your hand is actually, ang information is only at the spinal cord. It does not reach yet to the brain. So, diri siya, no? Wala pa siya nakareach sa brain, na pa siya sa spinal cord. Because the spinal cord is the center for reflex action. However, when from the spinal cord it reaches to the brain interprets that it's hot, then it is passed on to the motor neuron to the target organ, and then that's the time nga maka-feel na ka nga painful imong kamot. Kaya nga naman, tungod sa the information that is interpreted by the brain. But you have already removed your hand. No? So, that's how it happened. Okay? So, kani siya, mauna ni akong this is what I was explaining a while ago. There is calcium that will bind with the cell membrane for the release of the neurotransmitter in the presynaptic membrane by the vesicles. And the ACTH or acetylcholine travels across the synapse and is absorbed on the specific receptor sites again. Okay? So as atong receptor site, this is the receptor site. Okay? So that's the structure of the acetylcholine. So that is what happened when there is muscular contraction. So pag kuha nimo sa imong kamot from the hot object, that there is already muscle contraction. Okay. So action. So you have here the one I was explaining. What causes the depolarization is the coming in or the entry or the influx of the sodium because of the opening of the sodium gate here. Okay, that is one. So the membrane is said to be permeable to sodium because of the opening of the sodium gate. Now that is during depolarization. So pag makaabot na siya positive 40 MV, and then because of that, the result is downhill na po. Hindi pwede nga positive ang charge sa membrane. So what the cell do is to get rid of the potassium, opening the potassium gate so that potassium ions would be taken out from the cell. So minus na po siya positive, so mag-negative na po ang membrane. And it happens in milliseconds. So milliseconds na siya. The opening and the closing of the ion channels or mga gates will just happen in milliseconds. Okay? So, yun ani. These are mga gates. Mga gates ni siya. Mga protein gates. So, this is during depolarization and this is during, of course, repolarization. Potassium out, sodium in. Okay? Sodium in, potassium polarization, this one, depolarization. Okay? 100 signals per second, oh? This rapid removal allows nerves to transmit more than 100 signals per second. Kaya 1,001. That is 1 second. Pila ang ma-receive sa neurotransmitter na signal? 100 ka signals. So that is how marvelously you are made. No? So amazing. Okay? So, you have here. Now, acetylcholinesterase. Acetylcholinesterase is an enzyme that will break down or destroy the acetylcholine. So, kung ang acetylcholine mo yung neurotransmitter, nag-bind na siya with the receptor on the next cell. Now, it causes action potential. Now, pag action potential anak, so, naabot na po siya dito mo, adto na po siya sa next cell. Now, dili pwede class nga ang kaning neurotransmitter o receptor always mag-bind. When that happens, magsige na lang na og aksyon, illicit og aksyon. That's why natay mga cramps. No? Natay usahay mga involuntary contractions. Now, probably, ang normal yun ana, what is normal is, after the binding here, if the action is elicited, is exhibited already in the next cell, this neurotransmitter must be degraded. Now, say for example, for acetylcholine, dapat i-degrade siya with the acetylcholinesterase. It has to be degraded with acetylcholinesterase. Why? If it is not degraded, the action is always exhibited. Kaya usaw na lang kung nagsige na lang ana-ana, no? So muna nga na ay mga involuntary actions. What causes such? Because of the failure of the degradation of the of the neurotransmitter. Now, in the case of acetylcholine, it will be degraded by acetylcholinesterase. That is one way of regulating the transmission of action or information. So it is also inhibited by these two compounds, succinylcholine, decamethonium bromide. So nai-action niya, which is triggered by acetylcholine, kani nga mga inhibitors, acetylcholinesterase, then kani mo ni ihatag. Okay? That is to cut off the action caused by the release of acetylcholine. Okay? So it has to be degraded. Now, there are some drugs class. There are some drugs that failed to degrade the neurotransmitter. That's why they always show or exhibit the action. So what happened? Muna nga, permi siya high. No? Say, naka-high na siya. Magsige na lang na siya high. No? Kaya nga naman, dili man ma-degrade. So the action is always exhibited. So it takes seconds or maybe minutes, hours for the message or say for this neurotransmitter to be degraded. That's one of the actions of some prohibited drugs. But of course, when it is said to be degraded, so later on, ang iyahang lifespan is done already, then that's the time nga mo slow down na dayon ang person, no? Who is once high with drug. Okay? So there are some control of transmissions. So there are some say, like for example, kanisha, nicotine. Nicotine in low doses is a stimulant. It is an agonist because it prolongs the receptor's biochemical response. So pwede siya muhatag nicotine. So kung low doses, mawak siya stimulant. Kung high dose, antagonist. Block niya ang action sa receptor. So where you could find this nicotine? It's in the the cigarette. No? Sa cigarette. So, large doses, musical panigarilyo that blocks the action of the receptor. So, i-block niya sa imbis nga maulaw ka, i-block niya na that prevented you from doing the action. Say, imbis nga makaingon ka, maka-express ka sa imong feeling, or say, dili pa ka-express imong feeling, that's your action. Now, because something is introduced in your body, so that acts as antagonist, so munang naka-express na lang ka, large doses. So they are using mga synthetic drugs. Okay, but that's not good. So we have also amino acid messengers. Now, usually the cholinergic, amino acid messengers, peptidergic, adrenergic, more or less they have the same mechanism in the release of the neurotransmitter for the action to be exhibited. Amino acid inhibitory, excitatory, napoy inhibitory. Meaning excitatory, meaning they induces the transmission. Because inhibitory, they reduce the transmission in the neurons. Transmission of information in the neuron. Okay. So more or less, they have the same. Okay. Now, the adrenergic, you have here norepinephrine or epinephrine. Norepinephrine and epinephrine. Now, epinephrine is also called the adrenaline. So adrenaline or epinephrine or norepinephrine may act as both neurotransmitters and neuron. Again, if it is neurotransmitter, the action is very quick, millisecond lang. But of course, ang iyang longevity is short. Only, dali ra pud siya mawala. Paspas siya, pero short ang iyang lifespan. Now, what sustains them is the hormone. So, dugay mo ang action, dugay para sa inyo. Sugoon, ganit, panghugas, langay kaayo. Mura mo ni hormone. Murag hormone. Langay, kaysa nga tanan, dugay kayo. But, pag human pod, pulido pod. Limpyo yung tanan. Pero na uban pod sa inyo nga, sugoon gani. Hugasin plato, sugo na yun. Pero, daghan pa kaayog na, nangabilin. Daghan pag mga mess. So, short ra pod ang iyahang action. So, in our body, there are some messages which are exhibited due to neurotransmitters which are said to be very quick. So, kinahanglan ang immediate action. But since it is shorter lifespan, then it has to be sustained with the hormone. Okay? So, the hormone, which takes so long because muagi pa siya og blood. And then, ang blood muagi mo, saka pa mo, paubos, it takes time. But it has longer longevity that sustains the message or the transmission of the message. Okay, now what happened? Now here, we call this a signal transduction class. Kani sa adrenergic. Here. Now normally, we have this membrane. In the membrane, we have different receptors. Natay mga receptor molecules. Okay, like this. Now, say for example, mo ni ato ang messenger. Or it could be a hormone or a neurotransmitter. Now, mo ni iyahang binding site sa iyahang receptor. This is the receptor site for the messenger. Now, once the messenger binds with its specific receptor, there is activation of the G cells. Usually, G cells are kaning mga transmembrane proteins. kita nimo na sila or sa mga peripheral proteins na makita nimo na sila diri sa ilalom sa cell membrane. Say here, once there is binding of the receptor and the neurotransmitter or the hormone, that activates G cells or the goblet cells. G cells. Now, the activation of the G cells is caused by the hydrolysis of, it could be ATP or GTP, guanosine triphosphate. Guanosine triphosphate or adenosine triphosphate into GDP. So from tri to di, meaning energy is released. That energy activates the G cells. Now, the activation of this G cell in return activates this adenylate cyclase. This is another enzyme. The activation of this adenylate cyclase causes the release of this cyclic AMP. Asa ning cyclic AMP? Pras aning ang adenosine triphosphate, mahimong adenosine diphosphate, then marilis na po, mahimo na po adenosine monophosphate. So, adenosine monophosphate na cyclic. Now, this cyclic AMP that is formed out of the activation of adenylate cyclase or adenyl cyclase causes the release of a secondary messenger. What is secondary messenger class? The cyclic AMP. Ang primary messenger could be neurotransmitter or hormone. Ang secondary messenger is now the cyclic AMP. Okay? So you have here. Now, with the production of the cyclic AMP, that activates another enzyme. We have here the protein kinases. Mga kinases. Protein kinases. So like this, natay mga kinases here. So we have the cyclic AMP. So natay G cells, adenyl cyclase. Then you have the cyclic AMP, and then that activates another molecule or molecules until that one activates the DNA. Now, the activation of the DNA causes the transcription of the mRNA and causes the production of a protein. So, nanay protein, which is a product which is needed for an action. So, unsay action? Unsay action. So, depending on the protein that is produced out of this, the activation of this DNA. Okay. So that is what we call as signal transduction. Okay. So cyclic AMP, asa na siya gikan from adenosine triphosphate. So this is adenosine, then tulo ka phosphate, 1, 2, 3. So tanggal ang duha ka phosphates. Mo man ang energy rich. The bonds there are energy rich. So pagtanggal sa duha ka phosphate, ang mabiling isa na lang ka phosphate. So adenosine monophosphate. So you have here adenosine monophosphate. Okay? Or we have here the cyclic AMP. And this one acts as the secondary messenger. Okay? So that is what happened. Kung ang protein kinase is activated, it's activated now with the action of the cyclic AMP. Ang mulaton, una siya ma-open up, dapat naapay cyclic AMP, so it acts as the secondary messenger. So that's the time na ma-open up na ni siya, so nanadayoy action na ma-elicit. So you have here. Okay, that one. So of course, when you remove the signal, as what I have said, wala na action potential. So, dili na po refractory rest. Or mag-rest na po. So on and so forth. Okay. That's how it works. So, we have here term for epinephrine is adrenaline. So epinephrine or norepinephrine are called adrenergic messengers. Okay. Now, we have the peptidergic messengers. Actually, more or less, maorag hapon ilahang mechanism. This is the first brain peptides isolated, mga enkephalins. First brain peptides. These five pentapeptides are present in certain nerve cell terminals. So, nasya dili, mga enkephalins. They bind to specific pain receptors and seem to control pain perception. Muning ginapatay sa or gina-inactivate sa unsa ni mga pain relievers. Ang pain reliever serves as the inhibitor. I-inhibit niya. So, it could be antagonist or agonist para walay binding. Kaning mga kuan. So, that controls pain perception. Neuropeptide, it's potent or okay. So, you have here, this one is involved in the transmission of pain signals. Kani siya, no? Mga pain signals. Enkephalin. No? So, they bind to specific pain receptors and that seem to control pain perception. So, i-control niya ang pain nasa kanang what I said a while ago, the pain reliever. Okay. Now, steroid. Now, on steroid, there are large number of hormones are steroids. Like for example, testosterone, estrogen, progesterone, they are steroid. Nang nasa pills. Unsa nang nasa pills? Progesterone, ang nasa pills. Now, they are hydrophobic. Lipids man sila, meaning they cannot be hydrolyzed by water. So, they cross plasma membranes by diffusion. Diffuse na siya. Ito akong giingon, as what I have said, steroids can be like a suitor that can get inside the house and stay in the living room, and pwede po siyang sulod dito sa bedroom of the girl he likes. That's and of course bind with the DNA. So that is what happened in steroid messengers. Okay. Now, steroid hormones interact inside the cells with protein receptors. So most of these receptors are located in the nucleus, but small numbers also exist in the cytoplasm. So once it is inside the nucleus, the steroid receptor complex can either bind directly to DNA or combine with the transcription factor. So pwede siya direction sa DNA mo bind, pero sa transcription factor that controls the transcription of mRNA. And that influences the action of the mRNA or the DNA. Okay? That is that's why if you have maintenance nga steroid, that dili ko siya kung long term nganuman, pwede siya carcinogenic. Kung ga-take in ka og say for example mga pills, usually you are prone to breast cancer. If you taken in the pills, steroid man siya, so pwede siya mo go for mutation sa inyong mga breast cells. Kaya nga naman, they can enter into the cells of your brain. Susceptible ka sa breast cancer o sa ovarian or uterine cancer, cervical cancer, mga reproductive cancers. Basta magkuhan ka, kanang mag-take in kang pills, so di po siya maayo. Basta na kay maintenance na steroid. Or they can also brittle your bone cells. mukhang very susceptible ka for mga fraction, no? Brittle ang inyong mga bones. Because they could get inside the DNA and bind with it or combine with the transcription factor and influence the transcription action. Okay? So, that ends. So, class, you could imagine, no? This is how important your neurons or neurotransmitters and hormones. However, class, no? The nervous system, of course, that's where your neurons are, they are said to be constituents of the nervous system. That is the communication system that is used by the Holy Spirit to regulate the decision making of a person. Because your decision today determines your destiny in the future. Now, however, the enemy is trying to destroy your nervous system by introducing prohibited drugs. That prohibited drugs disrupt the normal actions of the body, especially the normal actions of the neurotransmitters in the transmission of signal. So instead of transmitting the right signal from the Holy Spirit, when the Holy Spirit say, bad, do not do that. On the other hand, the drugs may act as agonists or antagonists that prevents the binding. Okay? So there is no signal that will reach to the brain. Muna, imong kasab-an ang addict, magsigara na iyang mata. Oh? Sige nagpangasaba, sige nag-istorya ang mama o papa, advice, pieces of advice were given, still, wala. It does not affect the individual who is addictive. Okay? Now, what happened then? So, the individual cannot be stimulated or cannot hear anymore the still small voice. So, the information now is being controlled by these drugs. That is how the enemy is destroying you when you go into drugs. Okay? Now remember, our nervous system is the only system where God could communicate between His people and Himself. And Satan is destroying it. So, we have to be careful with these prohibited drugs. Okay? So remember, your body is God's temple. Okay? You have to take care so that Jesus will live in your body. Okay? Thank you and God bless.